Welcome to July's offering of Global Kinship. We're so lucky to have Sarbmeet Kanwal with us, and he is going to talk about how he sees his view of the noosphere from the physics perspective. I did an experiment with ChatGPT recently,
Ah,
and I asked it, "What is the noosphere?" and tell it to me like I'm a 14-year-old. And I'm about to read you the answer.
ooh,
The noosphere is a concept that was proposed by philosopher and scientist named Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. It suggests that there is a collective sphere of human knowledge, consciousness, and communication that exists beyond individual minds. In simpler terms, it refers to the network of ideas, information, and thoughts shared by all human beings. Imagine it like a giant web of interconnected minds where people contribute their knowledge, experiences, and ideas. This web includes everything from books and art to scientific discoveries and conversations we have with each other. The noosphere represents the idea that as humans, we are not just isolated individuals, but part of a larger global network of shared knowledge and understanding. It's like a virtual space where our collective wisdom and insights come together. With advancements in technology, especially the internet and social media, the noosphere has become even more prominent in our lives. It allows us to connect with people from all over the world, learn from each other, and share our thoughts and ideas on a global scale. So the noosphere is essentially the concept of a vast, interconnected network of human knowledge and consciousness that expands beyond any one individual and encompasses the collective wisdom of humanity. I might add that there are some that believe that it includes the collective wisdom of all
mm,
species, of all time.
mm.
So, with that perspective, I'd like to open this session with a prayer from Archbishop Oscar Romero, titled Prophets of a Future Not Our Own. So I invite you to take a deep breath and settle in for this amazing 90 minutes we share together from all over the world with this. It helps now and then to step back and take the long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is creation. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says that all could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. So this is what we are about. We plant seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces effects beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future, not our own. Amen. Thank you. Bob?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Penny. So just minor notes for our session, our time together today. We ask that everyone keep themselves muted until that time that you are speaking, so the rest of us are not interrupted by door slamming and dogs barking. And at the time we are ready for a Q&A, I would direct you to the Zoom control that says reactions. And under reactions, you're going to see a button that says raise hands. And when you do that, that'll put you next in line in the top left corner of the screen, and we can get everybody in sequence. And with that, I will turn things over to Gail.
Thank you. It always takes, we're eager to hear from Sarbmeet, but we have a few bits of business to make sure you know about first. One is I just want to express thank you and gratitude for those who have signed up for the meditation series. I think it's a very important piece of all of this, not just the intellect as we think about ideas, but actually embodying and connecting within the space in between us and all of creation. That even in the AI might have missed that part when they talked about we were connected, but it didn't say how and where, and that's invisible between us. But we're going to enjoy that invisible space. First one is tomorrow morning at 11:15 Eastern time. And second one, we're going to try for Monday, those who cannot come during the day, and that's at 9 o'clock Eastern time in the evening. So we'll see if those two work. And if you would like to be connected to this and you haven't yet, I'll say put it in the chat and we'll add you as an invitation to see if you can get you connected to that support of this program. Well, of course, we'll be meditating on time tomorrow. So the next thing is that we have several special education events coming up. First is Quantum Wisdom and Inquiry into the Nature of Time. And this is not one, but 4 sessions given by Sarbmeet on the question of time. And this is going to be a fascinating time. It's with a deep time network. And we have been given by the network a special code for any of you who have, oh, I'm sorry. We've been given a special code from the Deep Time Network for you to have the early bird special price all the way through to the day that the course starts, which is next week. So if you would like to do that later on, we'll put the code into the, should we do that now maybe? Into the chat so that you will know the code to put into the registration when you register. But that is something, of course, not to be missed, to go deep and farther and mixing it with a new story and the cosmology. So do we have that? Do we have it?
I just put the code in the chat.
Okay, great. Okay. Then as consciousness is rising, it's so exciting to see, yes, these other courses and thoughts as people are really moving to that noosphere space to see if we can look at our problems and solve them in a different way that involves, our whole being and our imaginations and our relationships. So this one is, it's a free video on Saturday, July 22nd, and they're going to offer a course that's our own Matthew Fox and our dear Brian Swim are going to be offering this together. And we hope that you will be able to go to the Shift Network and find that event and sign up for that as we begin to really the interest in the noosphere is really taking hold. In the last 6, 8, 10 months, there's been such an increase in consciousness as our creative spot to make the difference. So thank you, Bob. So in order to have those creative spots and make a difference, we need wise teachers like Sarbmeet Kanwal that who knew when he started his career that he would end up teaching us and so many people about cosmology and the new story and how to live within the then unknown intricacies of quantum physics. Amazing. So let me tell you a bit about him. Sarbmeet Kanwal, PhD, is an award-winning educator and a pioneer in novel ways of teaching quantum physics and astronomy. He holds a PhD in theoretical physics from the California Institute of Technology. His aptitude for explaining intricate scientific concepts in everyday language has made him a sought-after speaker among both science and non-science communities. He presented a TEDx talk on the new cosmic story entitled Chaos to Cosmos. In the last 2 years, he has been assisting with instruction for the Deep Time Network courses and teaching courses of his own for the Deep Time Network, Earth Literacies, Creation and Crisis, that was last year, and Global Kinship. Sarbmeet is a follower of the Sikh religion and a longtime board member of the Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought. There he has helped initiate several interfaith projects, including the co-founding of award-winning youth leadership program called Mosaic. A very creative man and one we're all grateful for. As our hunger for our knowledge of this universe, you can help us begin to understand. Thank you, Sarbmeet.
Thank you, Gail. I'm very humbled. And I'm also very honored by the number of people that have shown up today to listen to some of my insights on time. I was tempted to say that I hope that this hour will be a productive one for you, but actually, I just realized that the word productive actually has a problem, which I'll talk about later in my talk. So I actually don't quite want to say that. Okay, let me then jump in, and please let me know if you see any problems with my voice or the slides that I will be sharing in a little bit. Before I jump in, and let me also say a little bit about the format of today's presentation. I'm going to start by giving you some basic information about time, the way that science has uncovered some of the mysteries of time. There still are a lot that we don't know about time. I will not say much about the noosphere in the beginning. I will then pause, and Gail has said that she will enter into a bit of a conversation with me, which would be just another way of unpacking some of the material that I would like to share. And then at the end, I will open it up to question and answers from everyone. So just wanted to make sure that people are aware of the format here. So before I jump in and start talking about this concept called time, I want to get a little bit of feedback from the audience. So I'm going to ask everyone a question, and I want you to put a 1 or 2 word answer in the chat. And I'll be monitoring the chat, and maybe I'll read out some of the answers that you give me. So my question to you is, when you think about your experience of time, in whatever way you want to think about it, put down in the chat 1 or 2 words that come to you as a description of what time is to you. So this is not so much about what time is, it's about how you experience time. What are some of the words that come to your mind? So I see unlimited, flexible, a place of consciousness, every moment, life, aging, what a variety of things here. flow of experience, going too fast, yeah, fixed, linear, restrictive, yeah, moving forward in life, scarce, restrictive, yeah. Perception of change, it's a gift, it's a flow. A lot of flow word. Flow is definitely a word that comes up a lot here. Maybe making memories. Sometimes when I slow down, I'm able to savor my life. Yeah, we'll talk about a little bit about that. No time. You have no time. Yes. There certainly are paradoxes in time. It's an ebb and a flow, and it's an illusion. And we'll talk about that as well today. Some people find it scary. Others think it's very important. Some people are saying it's precious. Expanding, maybe, is that the word? Okay, time. So that's a pretty good collection of things, and that's exactly what I was hoping for. So one of the trends that I'm seeing here is that there is a little bit of an opposition to time. I mean, it's precious, it's wonderful, but also it's scary, and it's something that people seem to be always in short supply of. And so those are some of the things that I want to bring out and try and kind of come to some kind of idea about why we feel this way about time, and um, what is the insight that science is giving us about time, and how can we take that insight and apply it to our regular experience of time, and perhaps change our perception about it and change how we view time. So that's really what this is about. So let me now share my slides here. So let's see. I want to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. And all right, I think this is looking fine to me. If anybody thinks that there's a problem with how the screen shows up, do let me know. Okay, so we're going to talk about time, and then we're going to talk about what it has to do with the noosphere. So first of all, time is one of those things that is very, very familiar to everybody. It's a pervasive part of our life. And what I have here are just some idioms and phrases from the English language that treat time in many different ways and in different contexts. This is a very short sampling of the total number of ways in which you can imagine using the word time. I mean, if you go to a dictionary or a thesaurus, you'll see that there's literally hundreds of ways in which we express our feelings about time. So we really are, both literally in terms of the number of times we actually use the word in our language, both text and spoken, and also figuratively, because we are indeed immersed in time, because who can say that they have been able to leave time in any way? Perhaps some mystics might be able to say that, but most of us are stuck in time. So I'm going to share a couple of quotes. And these people are actually both physicists and, to some degree, philosophers of science as well. And so they, what did they have to say about the experience of time? They say that time is the most pervasive aspect of our everyday experience. Everything we think, feel, or do reminds us of its existence. We perceive the world as a flow of moments that make up our life. But physicists and philosophers alike have long told us that time is the ultimate illusion. This is from a book called Time Reborn by Lee Smolin, who's a physicist. Another quote from Carlo Rovelli in this wonderful little book called The Order of Time, which I highly recommend. We inhabit time as fish live in water. Our being is being in time. Its solemn music nurtures us, opens the world to us, troubles us, frightens and lulls us. The universe unfolds into the future, dragged by time, and exists according to the order of time. And those who have studied time from a science viewpoint have also claimed and still claim that time remains one of the greatest mysteries in the world. This is another quote from Rovelli's book. Why do we remember the past and not the future? Do we exist in time, or does time exist in us? What does it really mean to say that time passes? What ties time to our nature as persons and to our subjectivity? The nature of time is perhaps the greatest remaining mystery. Curious threads connect it to those other great open mysteries: the nature of mind, the origin of the universe, the fate of black holes, the very functioning of life on Earth. I'm getting a little bit of background noise, so someone may need to go on mute. Something essential continues to draw us back to the nature of time. And as I said, this is Rovelli again. So time has been pondered on for a very long time, as you know. And that makes us wonder about why we feel the way that we feel about time today. So many of you, when I asked you about time, expressed a certain amount of sort of an opposition or a challenge that time seems to express to us. If time is really so significant to our cosmos and to our universe, we would expect time to lead us towards a flourishing future. But it doesn't look that way when we see how people are challenged by time today. So the question is, are we misunderstanding what time truly is? So some of the things that don't seem to sort of really jive with this significance of time is that time, as I said, is often a source of anxiety. It seems to isolate us in many cases instead of fostering the connections with other people. We often find that we have no time to actually reside in time. We're always running away from it, or we're trying to beat it. Time seems to rob us of sometimes of our dignity and self-respect. We feel exposed as if there's something lacking with us. Time stops us from expressing our cosmic gifts. There's something in all of us that wants to be expressed. And if we are busy, perhaps in some way or the other, trying to get rewards and profits out of time, then we rob ourselves of that responsibility. Certainly, time comes in the way of social justice when we refuse to share our time with certain others that we don't feel belong in there. We create the situations today that have us so agonized and worried. And I also want to remind you that it is major upheavals like the one that happened recently with the pandemic and is happening again for all sorts of reasons having to do with climate change. It is those upheavals that make us rethink our relationship with time. And as you know, that the pandemic has had a very strong response to people. A lot of people just decided not to go back to their jobs and so forth. So there's something here that needs to be better understood. And that's really what I'm going to share with you today as best as I can. So what is it about time that seems to be so challenging? I think one way to express it is that we think of time as clock time. I mean, that's the natural way that most people would think about time. What time is it? It's so much o'clock and so forth. And so that kind of time seems to dominate our lives. And for many of us, time has become like a drumbeat to which we have to constantly, arrange our lives with. In many ways, we seem to have become the victims of time and the forces that have perpetrated a certain view of time over us. And that is very evident in the phrases that we use in our daily lives. Time is money. We got to beat the clock, seize the day. We have a race against time. Time is flying. Time doesn't wait for anybody. I mean, all of these things give us a picture of a time that completely dominates us and regiments us in so many different ways. And this idea is best expressed by an author that, again, would highly recommend if you want to understand more about time. And that's Jenny Odell. She's a young author that has recently published a book called Saving Time. This particular quote is from another book of hers that is called How to Do Nothing. In a world where our value is determined by our productivity, and that's the word productivity, that's the key thing here. Many of us find that our very last minute is captured, optimized, or appropriated as a financial resource by the technologies that we use daily. We submit our free time to numerical evaluation, interact with algorithmic versions of each other, like in social media, and we build and maintain personal brands. And yet a feeling lingers. We still recognize that much of what gives one's life meaning stems from accidents, interruptions, and serendipitous encounters, what we call the off time, which we don't have a whole lot of right now. The off time that a mechanistic view of experience is seeking to eliminate. So now I want you to change your thinking for a moment, not so much to the experience that each of you have of time. I want you to think a little bit about what is time. So when I say, tell me what time is, what is the word that comes to your mind? One word that appeared again and again, and I think that is, in fact, how many of us think about time, is we think of it as a flow of something. So in this, on this slide, I have tried to depict my model of time that I think will match with a lot of how many of you think about it. So let's think about time as a flowing river. I think you would resonate a lot with that. But how does that river connect with us? And the way that it connects with us, we think, is that it is dragging us forward. We have no agency over time. We cannot stop time. We cannot slow down time. Time is just dragging us forward. And in the back of it, what it leaves behind are memories. And in the forward direction, we can imagine what our future would be like, but we don't know until we actually get to our future. So you have always a past, present, and a future represented in this view. And we are also, the raft that I'm showing you here is meant to depict each one of us. We're being dragged by time. We really don't have a rudder or a set of paddles that we can use to maneuver ourselves in this river. We're just moving forward all together, in the present moment that we happen to inhabit. And how we measure how far we have moved in this flow of time is with our clocks. And so the idea of clocks here are represented by these red circles, which if you're looking from the top, you can imagine them to be posts by the river. And as we move across the river, through the river, we count the number of posts that have gone by. And so that tells us the duration of any particular time that may have gone by during our presence here in the river of time. So that's the picture that most of us have, or some variation of this picture is what most of us carry in our heads. And let's examine this picture a little bit more. So the word that relates to time the most is change. And there is a natural question that occurs to us. What is the relationship of time and change? And a question that also pops up along with that is, are time and change the same thing? Would time continue to go if change were to stop for some reason? And so one thing to understand here is that what time measures is a duration. That's really what it measures. Even when we say, when are you going to come here? You might give a number, but what you're really telling someone is that how much time would have passed between now and when you're actually going to be coming to some place. So time is always a measure of duration. And we do that by looking at how many of these posts we have passed as we are dragged through time. And here I'm just giving an example of a task, a kind of a change, where a basket weaver starts to weave a basket, at post number 3, and then he finishes weaving it at post number 8, and we count the number of posts, and we say that 5, minutes, hours, or whatever it might be, have gone by since, describes the duration of this change. So the question arises then, was time always thought about this way? And those who have studied our antiquity and our philosophers of old times and what they have written tell us that that is not true. Time was not thought about as a continuous flow until fairly recently, when this whole idea about standardizing time came into being. The first person who seems to have reflected on time, or at least the first person whose writing we still have on what they thought time was, is Aristotle. Aristotle argued that time and change cannot be separated. That even though they could be viewed as something different, for example, time can be viewed as something that measures change, but time is not something that can be separated from change. In other words, if change were to stop, then time would stop too. And the reasoning behind some of this idea was that, even if we stop change, there is always some kind of a change that is going on. I mean, and Aristotle claimed that change is happening within us, within our minds. We're thinking new thoughts are crossing our minds. So he argued that really change is constantly happening. And therefore, to think of time without change does not really make any sense at all. But this idea was completely ousted by Newton, who gave us a very different notion of time. So Newton argued that time is actually something that is not part of our reality. There's something separated from the reality. It is reality that changes, but time is something that is in the background. It's something abstract. It's this flowing river that we can never really see. It's invisible. It's, something that cannot be sensed in any way, but it's always there. It's flowing. And so he thought about this as this abstract kind of a canvas on which all the events seem to be happening. So here you see 3 giants, that were really great people in their own times: Aristotle, Newton, and Einstein. And they each had very different notions of time. So, as I said, Newton was the one that separated time from change. Einstein's contribution lay in the fact that he, first of all, added a component to time, which is what we call space. So he put them together and first claimed that that was what this background canvas was about. And later on, in his general theory of relativity, he actually showed that what we had always been thinking of as abstract and out of our reality is actually something that can be bent and stretched. And when he showed us that, he started to basically indicate that what we had been thinking was in the background actually turns out to be part of our reality. So let's look again at the experience of time that has been there since very old ancient times. So as I said, for Aristotle, time was a a way of counting the cycles of change that have passed since a particular time. And so you can start with a year, which is basically nothing but the time for the Earth to circle the sun. So that's a rhythm that the Earth has. And we can count the number of rhythms and say that so many years have passed by. Or if we want shorter durations, we can look at a month, which is nothing more than how the phases of the moon cycle. Or if we want something shorter than that, we can think in terms of a day and night, which is nothing but the cycle of the Earth going around its own axis. And we can go even to shorter time durations by using sundials, which further divide a day into what we call hours. And basically what a sundial does is it tracks the progress of the sun across the sky through the shadows, and that allows us to define what an hour is. One thing that is interesting about this version of time that is very much rooted in our nature is that it is not about precision. It is not about standardization. We now know that actually a day is not exactly 24 hours every day. It actually varies slightly during the course of the year. We also know that in the beginning, when people invented the idea of an hour, what they did was they divided the daylight part of the day into 10 sections and called them hours. And then they divided the nighttime into 10 sections, and that was also an hour. And then in the middle, the twilight and the dawn was given 2 hours each. And that's how we get 24. And so in winter, hours were smaller, and in the summer, hours were longer. So this precision was not required, and time was very much in tune with nature and not so much with any kind of a clock. And ancient people, we now know from some of their remnants or some of their ruins of the institutions that they build, regarded time as something to revere, as a power. This is a model of the Stonehenge. It is not exactly how Stonehenge will look today because a lot of the stones are missing, but this is how we reconstructed Stonehenge. And from this reconstruction, we know that basically it was a way to mark the seasons and the days of the year, because the direction in which the sun sets and rises changes over the course of the year. It's not east and west all the time. It's only actually east and west on the equinoxes, the 2 equinox days. But during the rest of the year, it wanders from east and west. And by looking at where the direction in which the sun rises and sets, people in olden times were able to track. And why did they do that? I mean, it wasn't that they needed to get to their meetings on time. They did it because they had a reverence for the power of time. Similarly, what we find in the olden days is that people used sundials to essentially divide up the time into shorter places. And once again, you see that it was the naturalness of time that was important. It was simply, the passing of the sun across the sky. But as timekeeping became more into the realm of commerce, as it became more important, for example, to be able to know when to plant the seeds, or it became important to understand where we are in a sea or an ocean where you don't have anything that you can navigate through, it turns out that time actually can really help us understand, for example, the longitude of the spot that you happen to be. So precision in time became important. Hourglasses were invented in the 11th century. Pendulum clocks came in the 17th century. And then these chronometers that could be carried in ships came in the 18th century. And so time has continued to be tracked in more and more precise ways. And we have now actually gone from using classical devices like pendulums to measure time or to clock time. We have gone to quantum ways to measure time. And so the digital clock, for example, is built on the basis of a quartz crystal. When a quartz crystal is electrified, it actually vibrates at a certain fixed frequency, and that can be used to track time to about a tenth of a thousandth of a second. And one would think that that's pretty good, but it turns out that for our technology, we need things that are even more accurate. And so atomic clocks were invented not a long time ago, a few decades ago, and they rely on the vibrations and fluctuations of a single atom. And we are now entering into the quantum realm here, which it turns out has a lot to say about time, as we will see. The duration of an atomic vibration is as small as a tenth of a billionth of a second, and the clocks that you can create are as accurate as they don't lose 1 second in 100 million years. And in the last decade or two, we now have optical clocks where the durations of what we are measuring is a millionth of a billionth of a second. And the accuracy is, it loses no more than a second in 15 billion years, which is the life of the whole universe. So if you started the clock, when the Big Bang happened, at most it would have lost or gained a second by now. You know, one might think, why do we need clocks so accurately? Well, first of all, technology keeps advancing and the needs for the technology keep increasing. For example, the atomic clocks now are absolutely essential for GPS. We cannot do without them because that's the accuracy that you need. But these optical clocks are currently being used not so much for technology. I'm sure one day they will, but they're being actually used to test the theories of physics, because at that level of accuracy, you can catch the tiniest variations from what the laws of physics tell us, and they can lead us to discovering new laws. So what has quantum physics told us about time? And you know, my course is titled Quantum Wisdom. So like I said, Aristotle had a view of time where he thought of time as being very much part of reality. Newton separated time from reality by thinking in terms of this abstract thing in the background that nobody can sense, but it can be used to measure stuff. And then Einstein came along and he added space to it. And he also was able to show that what had been thought of time as something so abstract and, you know, is actually not so abstract. It can be bent and curved and stretched and so forth. And so it starts to come in the realm of our reality, and it's not so different anymore. What has the quantum contributed to our continuing understanding of time? What it has done is it has showed us that Aristotle's idea about time and change being very much tied together is actually now grounded in very solid physics. Aristotle based his ideas on saying that change is always there because, you know, the human mind is continuously buzzing and working and so forth. At that time, he didn't know that there was a time in the universe when there was no life. Certainly there were no minds. And so what was change and time doing at that time? Quantum physics has now revealed that you don't have to depend on that for this idea of time and change being bound together into our reality. What we have found through our study of quantum gravity is that there is a limit to how short of a duration you can create a clock for. At a point that we now have through our theoretical analysis, we have a very good handle on what this limit is. And we find that beyond that, it makes absolutely no sense for us to be thinking of time in the way that Newton thought about time, as something that is flowing in the background. You have to give up that idea, and you have to give up ever being able to measure time with any further precision than that. So what we find is that in our search for this abstract time that Newton sort of gave to us, what we have find is that in the end, there doesn't seem to be anything that matches up with this idea. All that we find in time are cycles of different scales. The year, the month, the day, the oscillation of a pendulum, the vibration of an atom. These are all cycles and rhythms of nature. And through them, we construct what we think of as our time. And this is something that we now understand from our knowledge of quantum physics. By the way, just to tell you how small of this, how small a duration Planck time is, and Planck time is this shortest time that can ever be detected or measured. I won't write it in terms of figures and so on, because that's a little confusing. So I'll tell you that it's actually a billionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. That is how short this duration is. And it's amazing that we can actually even talk about a time that is so short, leave alone write equations about it. So there is another discovery that has come from our quantum understanding of time. That is perhaps even more important than the fact that it is granular, that it is not continuous, and that is that it is unstoppable. This idea of unstoppable change, which comes out of quantum physics, is basically embedded in a principle called the quantum uncertainty principle. This perhaps is the most fundamental principle of our universe. And in a very short way, the way I can describe it is, it says that no system can be pinned down with infinite accuracy. This is the exact opposite of what Newton told us, where he said that you can define these things with complete certainty and you can predict what will happen to them for all time. What quantum physics tells us is that that is simply not possible. And what does this mean? It means that if a system is not undergoing any change at all, then that means it is defined precisely, because no change is a very precise way to define a system. And since the principle disallows us from that, our conclusion has to be that change can never be stopped. And so constant change, rhythmic constant change, becomes a property of our universe. It's a property of nature that you cannot think about nature without thinking about this constant change. So even when there is no mind to keep, some kind of a change going, as we sometimes might want to think, you can stop all change, but you can't stop the mind. But even if there is no mind, this question that people have been asking for centuries about whether time is something that continues to run when there is no change, that question no longer has any meaning, because the idea of no change is outside the idea of our universe. Our universe cannot be in that state, so you can't even ask that question. And that's a very significant discovery. So, like I said, Aristotle said that the only way to measure change is by comparing its duration with other changes. So, for example, in this particular chart, going back to this basket weaver, we may decide that the basket weaver needs 5 hours to weave a basket. And then we might say, well, how can I express that in some smaller unit? And you might say, well, you can actually take another change. In this case, I'm taking the boiling of water. Water, let's say, boils in 5 minutes. So I can say that weaving a basket takes 10 or 60 cycles of boiling water. Similarly, I can say that boiling water takes 60 cycles of brushing your hair, if brushing your hair takes 5 seconds. And then you can keep going and you can say, brushing the hair can be done in 10 pendulum swings. So this way that we have of counting time that we are so used to, which is what we call clock time, is nothing more than comparing one change with another change. And you might say, well, what if I stop all changes? And don't I feel this idea in my own mind that something is still moving, that this time is still going forward? Well, it turns out that our research in biology shows us that our notion of time is also based on cyclical cycles, on rhythmic cycles. We don't understand them entirely, but we know that there are tens of different cycles within our brain and perhaps even other parts of our body, which allow us to sense time at many different scales. For example, we know the diurnal rhythm that creates jet lag when we go from one time zone to another. We also know that there are other scales of time within our brain that allow us to react to certain things within a certain amount of time. So all is rhythmic change. That's what time is. It's not a flow of anything. It's this rhythmic change that is an integral part of the universe that we have finally found time to be. So this linear flowing time that we are so used to, that Newton kind of introduced to us, and it has now become an integral part of our intuition, is really an illusion. There is no time that is separated from our reality. We can still build that kind of time through the process of emergence. So we can take these rhythmic cycles, we can string them together, and then we can create a linear time out of it, which can be a good approximation to what
you have.
I'm listening somebody in the background. Good.
Very apt way of putting it. Uh,
Gail, can you put somebody on mute?
There's somebody has a radio on or something, we all need to, we can hear that, so.
I'm working on silencing him.
You got it?
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So as I was saying, Newton's time is more of an emergent concept. So you can build it, yes, from these cyclical changes, but it doesn't truly tell you what the nature of time is. And this Newtonian time is not something that's not important. It's important to organizing our lives. It's important even to doing science, because a lot of the equations of science are written with this kind of a time in our minds. But it isn't truly and fundamentally what time is. So understanding this gives us the freedom to think of time in different ways. And that is the key. That is the key that we find from our understanding of time, is that there are other more useful, more progressive and ways of thinking about time that can lead us to the flourishing and the prosperity that we had always hoped that time would do for us. Okay, so what then is linear time? Linear time, as I described, is just taking these short duration cycles. Here I've shown how you can take, brushing your hair as our unit of time. It's a small rhythmic change, put one after the other, and you can create linear time. And so linear time is then something that we humans have constructed for our own use. More on the idea of linear time. It's a reductive way of looking at things. Time can be thought about made up of these repeating successions of small cyclical changes. I show them as kind of small circles here. Rhythmic change is pervasive in nature, from Earth's rotation to atoms' vibrations, and so on. And linear time misses out on the richness that is present in each of these rhythms, in each of these cycles. So a good place to understand this idea is by looking at the smallest rhythmic cycle that we have, which is the quantum fluctuation cycle that I talked about. So let's look at the quantum fluctuation cycle and see, what does it tell us about what's going on with time? And so here's what we call a quantum fluctuation would look like. What we had always understood to be a particle, which has a definite space, a definite position, and a definite speed, for example, in quantum physics loses all meaning. There is no such thing as a particle that has a particular place. And that's mostly because of the uncertainty principle, which says that if there was a particle at a particular place, then it would not be changing. And that's not possible. Change is always unstoppable. And so such a thing does not exist. So what exists in place is this idea that a particle can be at many places at the same time, is at least one way we say it, though that's a little bit of a misconception, I think. But the point here is that if you go looking for a particle with a detector, what will happen is that you will detect it in many random places. And you can never predict as to where you will find the particle next. So I tried to create a little animation of what this means, and I'll try and do this for you here. So let's say that you detect a particle and it shows up in that place where the red circle is. The next time I detect it, it'll be in a different place. Then it'll be a different place, then it'll be a different place, another different place, different place, different place, different place, different place, and so forth, and there. So these were all the different places the particle happened to be. And you can never tell where it is. So basically, what we are seeing here is a process of what you might call exploration. The particle is exploring its vicinity. It's in many places at the same time, and it's hoping to find something to interact with. When it interacts with that something, it gets manifested in a different way. And in this particular case, it interacts with a detector and it gets manifested. But the idea of having such a situation is that this particle can interact with some other particle and they can commune together. And that is what evolution is all about. So the real secret to this kind of time that resides in a cyclical rhythmic aspect of nature is the fact that it allows nature to explore various different ways in which you can commune together to build new entities, and you can push evolution forward. And here, what I'm showing is that what you associate with a particle then is what we call a cloud of likelihood. So these are this kind of a fuzzy cloud that I show here tells you the likelihood of detecting a particle. So you can see in the center, the cloud is a little more dense, so there is more likelihood there. And in the edges, it's less likelihood of finding it there. So that's kind of how we visualize the particle. And then what turns out, this cloud of likelihood is what oscillates. So what you're seeing now is what we call a quantum fluctuation. The likelihoods are changing constantly in a rhythm of time. And it is that rhythm of time that we can use to generate our present concept of, linear time of what it is. So time now starts to appear as the ancients imagined it to be a power of our universe. It is not just a way in which we measure change, it is what powers change. So all the change that we have seen in the universe from the Big Bang to now is powered by this concept of rhythmicity, which we call time. And it also turns out that if we try to go deeper into the cyclical rhythm for a quantum fluctuation, we don't find any time within it, because this entity itself is what generates change. And so it is the conception of time itself. So if you go inside one of these things, you'll essentially, you can think of it as the particle going all kind of different ways, but you can never write an equation for its trajectory because there is no time that you can use to write such a trajectory. So time then becomes the power that generates change. And we can now follow this in the history of our universe. What was the creation of atoms? Creation of atoms was nothing more than the fluctuations of these particles being used to find other particles around them with which this particle can unite. And there is always an element of uncertainty in this way of bringing about change, because you never know which particle might be the one that comes in the vicinity and becomes hooked to this one to form atoms and to form nuclei and so forth. So there is no way to predict, which particular atom will be created as a result of this exploration. Similarly, when a galaxy is created, there are reverberations in the hydrogen gas that actually allow for certain parts of that hydrogen to become denser compared to other parts. And it is around those densities that galaxies are formed, you can generally talk about, what the density of the galaxies will be, but you can never say exactly where a density would be formed, where a galaxy would be formed. The same is true with the creation of stars. Stars are created in the spiral arms of a galaxy as those arms rotate through the gas and the dust. And what those spiral arms do is they bring certain hydrogen atoms closer together so that they can get into a collapse, which actually builds a star. And you can't say where a star will be formed or what size a star would be, but you can in general say that you're going to form this many stars of this mass and this many stars of that mass. And so that uncertainty prevails through all of this rhythmic change. We can say that with the creation of planets. Planets are formed from the gas and dust that swirls around a star. As little particles come together into grains, into stones, into protoplanets, and so forth, you can never say what kind of a planet would form. It could be an Earth-like planet, or it could be a Mars-like planet, or it could be a Mercury-like planet. But you know that certain kinds of planets will form over a period of time. So the same uncertainty prevails everywhere. And finally, when you think in terms of the creation of life, you come to the fact that it is geological cycles of rocks flowing from lava to volcanoes to the center of the earth, the climatic changes that result from the movement of the earth in circles around the sun and around its own axis, atmospheric changes that are done by the exchange of gases that keep happening between plants and animals, tidal changes, seasonal changes, all of that stuff. It is that has been the source of evolving life. And so what we find everywhere is that cycles, rhythmic changes are the source of change. And this is what powers all of the evolution of our universe. And this power that is behind the evolution of the universe is the best way in terms of conceiving of what time is. I'm going to stop here, and I do want to make sure that we leave enough time for people to ask questions. So I'm going to stop here, and I am going to first give the floor back to Gail and see if Gail would want to bring out some things from what she has heard so far, and then we'll open it to other folks who have questions.
Okay, thank you, Sarbmeet. I'm going to suggest we just take a second here to kind of catch our breath and
yeah, sure,
some kind of cycle
yeah.
or so, and let things that touched us settle in a little bit. So we may want to make a question about that. I had so many questions as you're going through, and but I'm going to start with this. When my daughter was 2.5 years old, and we were on a summer vacation, and one day we'd been there about 4 days. She 10 o'clock in the morning and she walked to the door, and she stood at the door. What's she doing? What's this? And she had picked, and I didn't realize, but she had picked up a rhythm already. That at 10 o'clock you leave the house, you go and do something. So I thought about this as learning time, or but I think there's a relational thing in there now that I'm thinking about as you speak. That she caught it from us, from how we thought of time.
Yeah. Yeah. So the distinction that is important to make here, Gail, is what kind of a time do we find ourselves caught up in? Do we find ourselves caught up in the clock time? The time that basically gives us a drumbeat to which we have to arrange our lives, and if we don't, we miss out, or we have disruptions and chaos and so forth? Or are we catching on to those rhythms of nature that are intended to help us explore who we are and where we are going, and what it is that will open up for us in order to help the universe move forward? And that's the distinction. And I think we should be asking that question, what kind of a time am I falling into? And the feelings of both kinds of times are very different. The time that we first talked about, the linear time, feels stressful. it feels sometimes anxious ridden, anxiety ridden, and so on. But the time that we're talking about, the natural time that we're talking about, feels very different. It feels natural, it feels good, it feels like we're doing something that we're here to do.
Mm, mm. Oh, oh, wow.
Is it question time?
We can
Oh.
jump into question time, but I wanted to give Gail a little time earlier on before we open up to everybody.
Thanks. I know you must be popping with it. The question I had, what you kind of suggested to Sarbmeet earlier, is the question of what I call the shared time. Sometimes the consciousness that we're talking about in the noosphere, that and the evolution, the moment, like I said earlier, that suddenly everybody's talking about either consciousness or humanity rising, and it's all happened at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me, I promised to bring the noosphere in, and this is perhaps a good opportunity to do that. So what is the noosphere? I mean, Kenny gave us this wonderful description from ChatGPT. I mean, I can't imagine anybody doing a better job. Well, maybe there's a few things we can add to it, but I thought it was a great explanation of the noosphere. And so, you know, one has to now think about what is the role of time in the noosphere. If time is really this rhythmic cyclicity that is natural to our universe, and that allows the universe to continue to evolve. And if we think that noosphere perhaps is the next, you know, rung in the ladder of evolution that humanity is moving towards, then you start to ask the question, what are the rhythms and the cycles that are likely to move us towards the noosphere? The thing to keep in mind here is that as time has progressed, what in evolution was more of a physical coming together, atoms coming together to make molecules, molecules coming together to make cells, cells coming together to make organs and multicellular life, and even humans coming together to build cities and civilizations, that physical communing has now slowly moved into the realm of the mind. So, you know, an example would be that during the last few thousand years, we have not only figured out how to build cities and nations, but we have also figured out how to build institutions like democracy, like an educational, you know, cadence to our lives. Those things are not physical. They're some things that reside in our minds. So what we are finding is that as evolution is progressing, the physical coming together is now moving towards the more consciousness coming together, the more mental constructs that are helping us come together. And to me, the noosphere is yet another step in that direction, where the noosphere is not so much about, you know, the world coming together. The world is already together in so many ways, and the internet is making it even closer together. But what the noosphere is about is the way that our minds think, starting to align together into a common way of thinking about humanity, about the universe, about the cosmos, which is what will allow us to make the noosphere into a step in our evolution and not just a collection of social media sites. And so we have to now look for the rhythms that are going to get us to that. And those rhythms clearly have to do is for us to go from the linear time that we are so much caught up with into this rhythmic quantum time that I've been speaking about, that allows us to look for the opportunities that are going to allow this noosphere to develop, which means we have to give us the freedom we have to give us the uncertainty to not know what it will bring, but to expose ourselves to the possibilities that will allow those changes to happen. And that is what is going to build the noosphere, not any kind of an algorithm or not any kind of a method or any of that, in my view. I'll stop there.
That exploring, just a comment from that exploring at the end of the chapter about is like the particles early on that we're exploring, right? So that change happens out of that exploration, as you have talked about at other times, the potential coming out of a moment when the particles are, say, partying, shall we say, until they choose a direction. And somehow we have chosen then this direction.
Yes, and you know, you can blame some of the influences, the capitalistic influences, the colonial influences that we have gotten ourselves into for leading us in this sort of distorted, disrupted view of time. But our salvation now lies in realizing that and understanding that there are ways that we can extract ourselves from this pitfall that we are in. If you feel comfortable, Gail, we can open it up to other questions from other folks.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
If you have a question for Sarbmeet, please use the raise hands function in your Zoom toolbar. And Henry, you obviously have a question for him, so please go ahead.
Thank you. I have difficulty when you show the pulsating atom as being indeterminate, and you're talking about the rhythms. I find it difficult to talk about rhythms without a concept of time. How do you know there's a rhythm if there's no time to measure it?
That's a very good question. So there are two domains that you might be confusing here. One is the domain in which within the cycle, there is a certain, what should I say, a fluctuation, I don't want to really call it a movement, because then again will make us think about time. And that is why I actually specifically said that you cannot think of the particle moving in its vicinity at all, because motion requires time. So within that particular change of likelihood, how should I say it? So within that particular cycle, within that one single cycle, you can't tell where the particle is going to be. So that is kind of chaos. That is randomness. That is not a cycle in itself. What makes it into a cycle is that if you wait long enough, the same likelihood that you encountered at a certain point will come back again, will come back again, will come back again.
But if you say, if you wait, that implies that there's time passing.
Exactly. And that is time at the level at which you are testing how the likelihood is changing over time, absolutely over time. I mean, that is definitely time that we are talking about there. That's why you find that rhythmicity. But then if you try to examine within each of those cycles to see what's going on, you have no concept of time anymore, because within that cycle, there is no order. There's only randomness. And so randomness, of course, is not cyclical. Randomness is what it is. So there are two things happening at the same time. And I'm sorry if this is a little confusing.
That's okay.
But you have to divide the two domains. One is what happens within one cycle. And that is, you don't know where this particle is. All you can do is figure out the likelihoods. And then if you keep figuring out the likelihoods of these particles being in certain places, what you find is a rhythmicity in the likelihood. So the cloud is what is pulsing, not the particle. The cloud is pulsing, and the particle has really no way to pulse, because, as I said, it is outside the realm of time. I hope I'm making that a little clear. It might be kind of hard to follow, but there is a very important distinction here, and you brought it out really well by asking me this question.
Thank you.
All right. Mary Jo.
Hi, thank you for.
Hello.
Thank you. I am confused about and maybe it's because I'm a Westerner, of
Okay.
the noosphere, and I am concerned that we think of that wisdom and the mind as coming out of the brain functioning, rather than something that's related more to like maybe what Einstein would call the imagination
Mhm.
art realm, as the math heart
Mhm.
people would tell us, that connect us to a larger network of consciousness that's within and without of us. And
Mhm.
could you kind of comment on something
Yeah.
of that idea?
Yeah. Um, yes, I understand, Mario, what you are trying to point to here. So I'm a little bit careful in how I word this, because this idea of there being a what would I say, a time that extends beyond our brain, or not time, a consciousness that extends beyond our brains, right? I mean, that's the concept that I think you're talking about. That while this is a powerful idea, and we certainly want to be able to connect this, it is not an idea that I can build a science around. It's not an idea like, for example, these quantum things that I talked about, which are very well grounded in time. This idea of there being a whole consciousness, which connects to our consciousnesses and so forth, is a idea that today is beyond our ability of science to grasp. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. I mean, science is very limited, right? So in science, there are many things that we don't know. So I'm trying to limit myself to the things that for which we have good evidence that we can talk about. But I think this idea of there being a consciousness beyond our brains is a very powerful idea. And we can certainly try to relate it to some of the things that I'm talking about. But my whole lecture doesn't make that assumption. It simply says that, well, first of all, it says that there are physical cycles in the brain that allow us to experience the notion of time. And that has been studied in biology, and we understand it to some degree, but not completely. And the other part that you mentioned was imagination. And that is even more beyond this physical realm that I'm talking about. That is our ability to think about the future in terms of possibilities. And that's very powerful. If we are going to use these rhythmic ideas to move towards a noosphere, we first have to imagine the noosphere. If we don't know what the noosphere is, at least to some, some approximation, some idea, it's going to be very difficult for us to move towards it. So that's where imagination comes in. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Kilby.
Thank you, everybody. So me, I've found the understanding of time as a power of the universe very helpful.
Mm.
And where this connects with my faith in my hope, my relation to the times that we're living in, I think goes back to the likelihoods.
Yes.
So when you talk about, that everything works together and we can cooperate in this by adding to the noosphere for the future of the universe. And I wondered if you would expand on likelihoods, which I would like to talk about as biases.
Yeah.
And how does the biases for more complexity, etc., work together with time, or whatever your comments might be? Thank you.
No, that's good. That's good, Carol. So the likelihoods are not as much driven by us as they are driven by our environment and what it is that is around us. One idea that I've spoken about earlier, and I know that you heard me say that, is this idea of holons, where one hole is surrounded by another hole, which is surrounded by another hole, and so forth, until we get to the largest hole, which is the universe. And I hole here means WHOLE, not HOLE. These holes have an influence on whatever it is that resides in them. And I try to think of that in terms of a sort of a guidance that they provide for us if we tap into them, if we allow ourselves to be present to the power of those holons. And so that's where likelihood comes in, is that the pattern of likelihood that we have today, which, for example, might be a likelihood pattern that is biased towards cataclysm, that is biased towards a kind of a climate change that is going to make us, that is going to might even destroy us. We don't know. So that's the kind of likelihood pattern that we are hoping and wanting to change into a different likelihood pattern that will move us in the direction of prosperity. And so in order for that to happen, two things have to be done. One is that we have to allow ourselves to be present to those influences that are likely not the influences of consumerism, not the influences of capitalism, but the influences of nature, of cosmos, and so forth. And if we are allowing ourselves to be present to them in whatever ways we decide is the best way to do it, it might be just, spending more time in nature. Those are going to change the likelihood patterns in the direction that we want them to change.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yes, Betty.
Yeah. Betty, you're muted. I can't.
Yeah, there. I'm kind of having a hard time deciding whether I really want to start saying anything. Okay, I was in preparation for this talk. And I'm so thankful for everything, by the way.
Thank you.
I spent some time thinking about the topic, and I just sat out in the nature, and I was thinking about change, and clocks and all that stuff. And then I asked myself questions along the way and just let my imagination take me wherever it went. And I thought about, well, change is always, and what's the reason for change? And I thought, the reason for change is to maintain its existence. Okay, that really helps a lot, doesn't it? And eventually it popped into my head when it came to time, that time is there, we need it to synchronize the space. And then I thought, well, space is where events happen. The energy or the particles are in space, and there are changes going on. What drives all that? And I've always, thought in terms of the energy in the universe and the driving forces of entropy and all those laws of, so forth.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what if what's really going on here is that there's another totally unknown concept, which I felt like you were touching on.
Okay.
Because it felt like I was getting closer to when you were saying something that it might coincide with what I was trying to get at. But this word synchronize came up, and I thought, no, that gives this power then to time. Time is the one that's the driving force, and time is the one that brings in its rhythms, or its motions, whatever you want to, I don't know what word to use with it, but it brings events together in space. Yeah. And then the evolution and progression of those events can go forward, so that okay, now the question is, what is my question? I think you're already hinting that what might be the okay. I'm going to stop. Okay,
that's fine. I mean, I caught enough little things in what you said that I think I can try to maybe not answer all your questions, but kind of give you an answer. The first thing is that you talk about space, and that's something that I really haven't brought it in. I mean, I mentioned a little bit how Einstein brought time and space together, but it would take me a lot more time to explain how that coming together is. And I certainly intend to do that in my longer course. So I won't go into all of that relationship, but I will say something, because, you talked about the idea of keeping things steady or constant and so on. And what I wanted to say there is that you're touching on something very important there, because evolution is an amazing balance between keeping things the way they are and allowing them to change at a certain pace, a certain cadence. So the rhythmicity that I talked about, which is our new concept of time, the thing that powers change, that rhythmicity, if you allow it to be the way it is, can be eternal. You know, things can go round and round and round forever. So the rhythmicity is a way to keep things steady, but steady only to the point that you allow the rest of the universe to work on that steadiness so that it can move it forward to the next step in evolution. So both things are happening. The steadiness gives the universe the time that it needs to bring the right opportunities that would allow the rhythmic part of it to now go on to something different, something bigger, a new rhythm, you know. And so both things are important. You know, you want that steadiness, and you also don't want it to just be there, because then that's nothing. That's no change, right? We don't want that either. So you see the balance that works there?
Yes, and I'm also willing to see that time has many different variations in its cycles, which then affect the variations, and the probabilities become just like infinite for what's going to be in contact for that evolutionary experience. But it seems like an overriding force is in there, almost built in.
Absolutely.
That is going to take us somewhere, as painful as it may be at times.
Time is the original force. Time, to me, time is the thing that has brought us where we are. Time, you know, I don't know what word. I mean, maybe you could even use the word God here. But for me, time is that thing that has created what has been created, right? So yes, time is indeed the most powerful force that we are encountering. And I'm seeing that you know, you're very welcome, Betty.
Thank you very much.
Question. I want to make sure that I'm not leaving anybody out, because we're getting towards the end of our hour here. So are there any other questions? Yes, Joe, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk. I think I'm trying to put rhythm and consciousness together when I say that a wise professor told me there's just time in our living where all of a sudden civil rights was the matter, when women's voting was the matter, when LGBTQ took, somehow that rhythm brought about this consciousness.
Yes, Joe, I think you're touching upon some important things here again, which is something I don't have a lot of time to go into, but so many of the problems that we have today, for example, you know, the problem of othering people, not being able to have community with people that are different from us. A lot of that has to do with time as well, because what we need to do is we need to be able to co-reside with others in our time. We need to be able to share our time with them. And when we don't do that, we essentially put those people on the outside. And so we create some of the problems that we see in the world today. So yeah, you can relate a lot of these things to this idea of who do you include and exclude into your rhythm of time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Sarbmeet in particular, for your thoughts and your wisdom today. Penny, did you have words of closing you wanted to leave us with?
Yes. So, well, first of all, I wanted to say that what I talked about today is only touching, you know, a very small part of the subject of time. As people have mentioned in their questions, there is a lot that is not yet said, but I hope to cover in my course. For example, things having to do with the relationship of place and time. The idea that time relates to story, and the fact that when we look at a particular place, we often miss the point that that place has time incorporated in it. And that time is basically shows up as the story of that place. Every stone has a story. Every molecule has a story. And so that way of thinking is a whole another way of expanding on some of the ideas of time that I've started on. But again, I want to emphasize the fact that my whole reason to offer the course and to be talking about time is to quote unquote move us to a better concept of time than the one that we live with today, and hopefully a concept of time that will help heal many of the problems that we are facing in the world today. So maybe that's a good place to end. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarbmeet.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And those who want to sign up for the course, the code is there, and you can ask Gail or Penny if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, we've both studied with deep time. Also, the flyer that you get from us has the announcement about his class. So you can find it there, and then take this QWCSC 25.
Yeah, that'll give you $25 off.
Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth. I can't find people here. No, Penny, did you want to close this out?
Sure. Who better to send us off after this expansive conversation? Whatever mysterious force that has been at work throughout all these years has not gone to sleep or retired just because we humans came along. All you have to do is let your consciousness be flooded by that force, and you will know what to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Perfect ending.
Beautiful.
Thank you.